today on the podcast, we have Briana Boehmer on the show. Welcome to the show, Bri.
Thanks, Lindsay. I'm really glad to be here.
We had to reschedule this because I chipped my tooth.
And I want to know how. I want to hear the story.
I was like, I don't know if it was like an hour before. I was like, listen, because it was the day before I was leaving to go to Michigan. And I was like, if my dentist can get me in today, I got to go. I was doing, it was the end of a workout. Okay. And I was doing push press up with a barbell. And I must have been very tired because it was like, you know, the end of a lifting workout where you're doing like a Metcon and you're like going from thing to thing to thing.
Right.
You're kind of maxing out on reps more than anything. It's like 30 seconds of this as many times as you can.
Wow.
And I bopped my chin, like boom, and it like slammed my teeth together. And I could just immediately feel like sand in my mouth, which was my teeth. Yeah, my tooth. Yeah. And so this front tooth here was, it's, you can't tell anymore.
Oh my God, it's amazing. I was going to say it because I'm like, which tooth?
Yeah, they fixed it. I mean, they just filled it in like a filling. And I still don't understand it, how it just looks the exact same. It's a little tiny bit shorter than it was, but
no one's going to, I could like, we're our worst like critics. Like no one looks that closely.
No, but I was like, it was like all jagged. And then another one kind of got a little bit over here too. So yeah, I was like, wow, I chipped my tooth lifting weights. Cool. There's a reason I'm a runner.
Right.
I also had a huge bruise.
It's not like you fell or anything.
No. I just like slammed it. I'm like, why was my chin in the way? I don't have like a massive chin. So now every time I do that move, like, I'm paranoid. I'm like, yes. And I had a huge bruise on the bottom of my chin too, which you couldn't really see.
I was just going to ask, what about like anything else?
Yeah, no, it was just bruised underneath there. I mean, it was bruised pretty bad, but anyway, so 2 weeks later, we've rescheduled the interview.
I'm super excited, just as excited as I was before.
So I was introduced to you when you were on the panel that I did in Boston with Elvin and Brenna, which was super fun with Oiselle.
Yeah, it was awesome. That was honestly one of the highlights of the weekend, just being able to be a part of that conversation. And when I went and re-listened to it, just, you know, you kind of forget some of the conversation that happens, and, you know, like Elvin's story and, you know, being pregnant and like not getting kicked off the team, like these are amazing stories. And then Brenna and her mom, like those need to be told. I would have never known those things, you know. I mean, it's so wonderful that Joanna told Elvin's story, because who would have known that that's something that is reality for these athletes. So yeah, it was just such a wonderful night and great questions. And I love Oiselle putting on things like that too. So
yeah, it was a really cool weekend. I think those Boston Marathon weekends are like so filled with so many different events and shakeout runs and all the things.
Yes.
And I felt like this was unique. Like I felt like this was different than what all the other events are. And I mean, I've been a part of lots of other events too, but like this seemed a little more intimate.
That's really cool hearing that from you, Lindsay, just because, yeah, you have seen a lot. Like, I mean, to me, it felt just like I left feeling so grateful to be there and to have had the opportunity to meet these people. And what an amazing thing that Boston brought for me was to have that experience. But then also just, you know, like the stories being told were so unique. And I'm like, how can we keep doing this so that people hear that? You know, it was very, like you said, it was very special and unique.
Well, and telling stories of people that maybe aren't always on the stage, right?
Yes.
Which it's exciting to do those interviews too, but like also there are so many other things and stories and people that everybody else just doesn't know about. And so to be able to do that was so cool.
Yeah. Like, I mean, honestly, the first thing I told my husband when we left was there's something for me personally that is validating in a sense to hear stories that you can relate to. And it's not that I don't relate to like these really famous people on some of their experiences, but it is difficult in some ways sometimes. And when you hear some of these stories that aren't always being told, that you're like, wait, that's me too, or that's me too. And we had a conversation prior about just like our parents supporting us, right? And hearing you tell me that you've had experiences like that. I mean, it was the first time I had someone tell me that, because normally I see the stories and the people, there's their dad on the side of the road with a sign telling them good job. I'm like, that's not my reality. Right. And so just hearing stories that just feel much more like in sync with what you experience is just so helpful. And then you see that these people have accomplished things that you're trying to accomplish, So I think we need more of those, just because the everyday person needs to hear that. Like I don't know if you've ever done this, but how many times have you Googled, like, has anyone experienced this, just to like feel like I'm not weird?
Yeah.
Right? Like, does anyone have this? Because I have this. And you just want to know that it's okay.
Yeah. And shout out to Joanna for writing the book and kind of being a part of getting this group together. What was the other event, though, you did? You were on the main stage at the expo with the Run Further and Faster ladies, who I love. Julie.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then Cherie, part of Women's Running. She was also one of the co-hosts of that. And that was, another panel just basically telling women in running stories, just from different, like, same kind of thing, like telling these kind of almost untold stories. We had Alyssa Harvey on there, who I remember her growing up just because she was like one of the premier mid-distance runners. And then she would like transition to like long distance and still run 800, and she's still running. It's just amazing. So they were just bringing in those stories just to kind of like, and then Kelly Bruno, who is an amputee, trying to kind of change the game for amputees. So it was kind of telling these like, women's stories that are kind of a little untold in our journeys, and for me, like, reaching some goals later in life. And so, it was really, really cool. I was actually really impressed with the turnout. We had a packed house.
Great.
Which was really cool. Yeah. That people wanted to hear those stories, which is a testament to what you were saying. I think because the panel prior had some more well-known people and it wasn't as attended. And this one, it was packed. And I thought, people want to hear some of these, just like we're just normal people, like, like
a little more relatable even.
Yeah. Like some of the questions we got were, people who definitely had experienced some of what we'd experienced, so.
I mean, not that a 2:33 marathon is relatable to me.
I didn't know I could do it either, so don't worry.
Oh, okay. Well, speaking of that, so you said that part of your story on that stage was talking about like finding the marathon a little bit later in life. And I think we should talk about that. You debuted the marathon in 2021, ran the 2:33 at age 41, 42.
Yeah.
Wow.
Almost 43.
And so
my birthday was like a couple weeks later. So,
okay. Well, and we should say you did run at CU. So you are you knew you were a gifted runner. Like you knew that you had a talent there. You ran there with Kara, right? Kara Goucher.
I did. Yeah, I ran at CU for 2 years. Kara was there. She was 1 year ahead of me. And then I ran at Wisconsin for 2 years. I transferred to Wisconsin and ended up running with other people who were Olympians. And I was surrounded by phenomenal athletes. I look back at it and I'm like, oh my gosh, like these people like won medals. And who
did you run with at Wisconsin?
So at the time, Erica Palmer, now Erica Cortez. Erica won the national title, but then she ended up getting injured and not running after that. But then Hillary, what is her last name now? She's an Olympian for Canada.
Okay.
Shoot, I'm trying to think of her last name. Her husband is like a big researcher. I feel bad that I'm not going to get her name, but
here, we can look it up real quick. And then you can just say it like you knew it.
Right?
We'll edit this out.
Nice.
No, I know. I hate that when you're like, I mean, I just thought about that when I said the Run Farther Faster because I knew Julie's name and I didn't know the other one's name. Hillary. Yes, how would I look her up? Hillary.
Let's see. Hillary.
Runner Canada.
Yeah, Canadian 1500. Let's see.
See, we couldn't do this if we were
I love live. That we can cut this out.
Is it Stillingworth?
Yes, Stillingworth. Yeah, okay. That's her last name. Her husband is a big researcher. So Hillary Stillingworth.
Wait, it's not Hillary Allen, is it?
No, that wasn't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and you can say that.
An Olympian. Okay.
Okay, we'll cut this out, and now you can say her name.
So yeah, at Wisconsin, I ran with Hillary Stillingworth. I mean, she's a 1500-meter Olympian for Canada. And we just, I was surrounded, like Susie Faber Hamilton was one of our coaches. Like I was just surrounded by these amazing athletes.
Uh-huh.
So, Wisconsin at the time was one of the top programs as well. So Colorado, we were one of the top programs, but so was Wisconsin. Both men and women were top. So I was just surrounded by amazing athletes. So, I mean,
Jerry with Barrowman Track Club, he used to coach there too. Did he coach there when you were there?
He did. Yeah.
Okay.
And it's funny because Jerry was so awesome. Like as a story of my life, I get injured. I'm easily injured, and I was injured most of my time at Wisconsin, not at Colorado. Basically didn't have any injuries there, but Wisconsin, I was. And I would just go and like sit in Jerry's office and talk, and he was the coolest. Like he would just tell you funny stories. Oh my gosh, the coolest. Yeah, and he was a new coach at that time. Like he had coached at NC State and then came to Wisconsin, and it was still like young in the coaching scene. So it's so cool to see his trajectory. Like I don't know, like back then it was just like he was just very much like that newbie. And he would talk to you for as long as you wanted to talk to him. It was great.
And then what was coaching like at CU? Was that intimidating, just being such a prestigious program?
Well, when I was there, I mean, honestly, it hadn't gotten to that point yet. We were just getting to that point.
Okay.
I kind of like, so I don't know if you know the book Running with the Buffaloes, but that was,
I was gonna say, you're in that
I'm in that
phase.
Book. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm actually even in the book, like mentioned.
You are.
I mean, it was about the men's program, but like,
yeah,
they mention women
it
every once in a while. So yeah, I'm in there. And that's what really was the start of the legacy that is now CU.
Okay.
And so I was there when it was being built. I mean, honestly, like Mark had this really interesting take on how he even recruited. Like he recruited a lot of athletes that he could tell had potential, but weren't like necessarily Foot Locker winners and things like that. And it was pretty fantastic because he got some talented people that were just overlooked. And I love that concept. Now it's different. People want to run for CU, but at the time he had to be scrappy and he had to find athletes that were like diamonds in the rough. And I definitely was one of those people where I ran really good times, but I was at altitude. And so coaches totally at that time were like, oh, that's slow. And they didn't recognize that, that's actually not bad. And he recognized that with a lot of athletes. Like these are good athletes that people are overlooking, and built some amazing teams as a result. I mean, he did get some really good recruits after that. See, like when Adam won the national title.
Yeah.
I mean, now all of a sudden doors open. Yeah. People are like, oh, I want to run at CU. And now he's starting to get these, like, I know the Torres twins were like the next big recruits. And I don't know if he would have gotten them had Adam not kind of done what he did, because it really helped like shine a light on the program. So yeah, it was a cool thing to be a part of, like.
What an art to be able to like recruit kids that maybe aren't running the fastest times, but you see potential, because I'm assuming there's a lot of like personality that goes into that too. Like I see that this person could be trained to run these bigger, better times, or whatever you want to call it. Like I see that potential. And how cool is it as a kid to have a coach look at you and say, I know the numbers aren't there right now, but I see the potential. That's a confidence boost right there.
It really is. And how much don't you wish that we did that more, just in so many facets of life? Like I can't tell you myself, like how many times, like when I graduated from college, like I knew I had potential to do great things, but it was very difficult to convince people of that. So like I, applied for sponsorships, couldn't get the time of day. This was just at the beginning of when those teams were starting to form. Now we have like the Hansons and stuff like everywhere. But when I started, they were new, and I would send my times and be like, nope, sorry. And I look back and I think, at the age of 42, I ran 2:33. I had potential.
Yeah.
And you ignored it because I didn't have on paper what you needed to see right there. And I think there's something to be said about, it's very easy to sponsor the Tiger Woods and the people that it's obvious. It takes a different level of, like, I actually think genius to see that hidden potential and create something. It's not creating something out of nothing. It's just creating something where people aren't looking. And you can do that with business. I mean, I think the best businesses in the world, like they found something that people weren't like really tapping into. It wasn't obvious maybe. And I think there's something to be said about that. And I think we are so superficial in how we look at things sometimes.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
That's so
I wish
true.
that happened more in just so many different ways. Right. Because
Yeah.
I mean, so of course it's easy to, again, sponsor the superstar,
The
but
national champion.
yeah. But then does it make you wonder how many superstars are out there that will never be found?
That will never be found. And how much of that is on them, how much of it is on who's looking or who's picking them up, or how much of that is like a self, like I'm going to keep going, how much of that is like
Yep.
nobody's paying attention.
And do you give up? Like, I feel like,
do you give up? Yeah.
and it's easy
What was
to
your
at some
story
point.
like? What was your story then? Because you were saying you were sending the letters trying to find it, and then you did run the 2:33 at almost 43 years old. What was your life in between all that?
I mean, I kind of gave up on the athletics part, at least from the standpoint of like, I had run with people who ended up going to Olympic trials and even to the Olympics. And there's this part of me that was like, they did it. Why can't I do it? But at some point, when enough people tell you you're just not good enough, you just kind of go, I only want to spend so much time. Like, I'm not, maybe I'm not, I only want to spend so much time on this. So I shifted my focus to business and went into entrepreneurship and started small businesses myself and got so entrenched in that, that it definitely filled that void of trying to accomplish things, and make some sort of, meaning out of what I was doing each day, right? That I felt like I could grow and expand my space. But I still kept I still kept doing the endurance sports. I just didn't do it at the level of which a professional would do it. So, I got into triathlon, did Ironmans, did all of these other like kind of endurance based things, but always was working way too much to be able to focus and do it really well. And it's just really fascinating how I'd done triathlon for years and years. And I mean, I was a runner by trade. That's my background. And admittedly, truly do not like to swim. I mean, it was pulling teeth to get to the pool. And if anyone can relate to this, I mean, there were times where I literally would drive to the pool and I'd sit in the car for like 20 minutes. And I'm like, well, now it's too late. I guess I need to go home now.
Oh my gosh, totally.
Because I hated it so much.
It's so hard to jump in.
I mean, and
it's just monotonous.
It's terrible. And I'm not a swimmer. I had to teach myself how to swim. So I had to learn how to swim as a grown adult.
Yeah.
And I enjoy biking, but admittedly it scares me still a bit. Like, I don't feel comfortable out there. And so when the pandemic hit, I just was like, well, I'm going to do what I love. I'm just going to run. And I think a lot of like the cross training I did was beneficial, of course, but then being able to just focus on one sport, I started to find fitness in running that I hadn't seen in literally decades. And so I was like, well, maybe I'll sign up for a marathon and just see. Like, I honestly, in the back of my mind, I thought maybe I could run an Olympic qualifying time, but it honestly wasn't 100% the goal. I just wanted to race a marathon because I didn't know really how fast I could run. But I think there's beauty in the fact that there was, at that point, at that age, no more like preset expectations, no one telling me what I can or can't do. It was like, in my mind, like that was gone. And I was just doing this because I love it. And there's something to be said about that. And then, once I did it, then how do I recreate that novelty and that lack of expectation and just enjoy what I'm doing? Because the whole time I was running, I mean, I remember thinking like, wow, that's pretty fast, but I feel good. So I'm just going to keep going. And I, in my mind, didn't even know what that time meant. Like, that's how like just fully just present in just running and enjoying what I was doing. I was, so that when I got to the finish line, I look up and I'm like, wait, what? Like, that's the time I was running? Like, no clue. Zero. The math was
Must
not
have been like
registered.
Was it 550s? 555?
Yeah, 550 pace. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just,
oh my gosh.
I don't know, like I was clicking off miles and I just felt good. And I was like, well, I don't feel out of my, and if you look at my splits, I am not kidding. Cause this is how I am. I'm like, I'm just it's like clockwork. I'm just very monotonous. And so it was like 550, 551,
Oh my
549,
gosh, the
550. I
whole
mean,
time.
every single mile, whether there's an uphill or downhill,
Wow.
like every single mile was just the same.
Were you
Um,
self-coached?
I was working with a group called the Boulder Underground.
Oh
So I
yeah.
had people to meet with, and yeah, and that was really helpful too, just having people to meet, which is difficult in Boulder because I live in Boulder, Colorado, where basically everyone is
Everybody.
like,
The Mecca.
yeah. So you can't just join most
Yeah.
groups. You can't just join.
Yeah.
Like most of these, it would have been the same as when I was in my 20s. They'd be like, sorry, no, you can't run with us.
Oh,
I
cool
mean, that's
kids
just the
club.
reality, right? Like
Yeah.
these groups have Emma Coburn and stuff on it. So
Yeah.
like you just can't walk into any group. But they were very like, it was kind of more the middle class group in a sense, where it's like we all have jobs. We're meeting at,
Middle
6:30 in the
class.
morning. Yeah. And so that was really helpful.
Blue collar runners.
Blue collar. Yeah.
That's so cool. Okay, so when you're running the 233 there, who's there like excited for you? Like who's paying attention? Who's cheering you on?
I mean, and that's kind of a little bit of the beauty of it. Like, obviously, the people I was running with Boulder Underground, and then my husband. Like, not
Yeah.
really anybody knew that I was running the marathon.
Yeah.
And even if they did, they didn't know I was trying to run anything fast,
Yeah.
right? And so it was really just so under the radar, like super, super under the radar. So much so that like I wasn't even supposed to be in the elite field. And I like got in last minute because there was an opening. Like I kept asking the race
Mm.
director, and she's like, well, if there is an opening, like, there's a list. And so I got in last minute. I had like a kind of makeshift bib that wasn't the normal elite bib, which made it difficult to even get in the corral.
Yeah, I bet.
Like, so it was just one of those things where the whole thing, like even when I was standing on the line, I'm like, do I really belong here? Like, this is kind of, I'm just going to stand at the back. Like I literally stood at the far back of the field and was just like, I'm just going to hopefully not embarrass myself now that I'm in this field. And yeah, so it was very much under the radar, which I think was beautiful in a sense. I just had the people who really care about me know that I was racing. And again, as you probably know, like the people who really love you, most of them really don't understand times.
Yeah.
Like they don't care. Like they
Yeah.
don't, I could have run 3:30 and they wouldn't have known any different.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's this weird, smaller world of running that people know what that means, but most people don't. I teach a class at the university here in entrepreneurship. And when the professor I teach with always likes to tell the students, I run marathons. And then they'll like tell, like, what's your time? And this last semester, I told them my time, and some of the kids understand that and some don't. But one kid goes, oh, so what's the world record? And I was like, at the time it was 2:14. It wasn't 2:11.
Uh-huh.
But he's like, oh, you're really close. And I'm like, bless your heart. No, I'm not.
Yeah.
That's how like they just don't.
Yeah.
And it just gives you that perspective of just like, honestly, just doing it. To most people, they're super proud of you. They think it's amazing. And I think we forget that simple fact, that we kind of place additional meaning and stress on stuff that really most people wouldn't,
I want to talk about how you were saying like how it was so beautiful that you were at the age that you were, like there was no pressure, no like I have to run a certain time, I should be here. And I think I've heard people talk about this over the years in regards to things outside of running as well. There's something about like your 40s where all of that kind of just like fades away a little bit. And I wonder, like, is that true? Can we actually practice that before our 40s? Or, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Can someone at 25 actually have that maturity and live that way? Or is it just part of like the wear and tear of life?
It's a really good question. I mean, I wish I could say with certainty that that's something that could happen in your 20s. But to be honest, like here's my personal perspective and take is that the only way I got to that was through all the wear and tear and time, because in my 20s, I didn't know. You only know what you know at that time, right? And certainly at different phases in our lives, we have different, expectations and, things that are kind of like our reality, and then of course lived experiences, right? And so the things that I lived through the last 20 years leading up to that are so different than what I lived through the 20 years prior when I was 20, right?
Mm-hmm.
And realizing the things that do and don't matter. Like I think about in my early 20s, I just didn't know that some of this stuff wasn't going to matter,
Mm-hmm.
and that I shouldn't be placing that much energy on certain things. And I would love to say that we can, and that there's no reason why we can't, except that you just don't have that. You have to take it for what someone tells you, right? Like, oh, that doesn't matter. And you're like, when you're 22, you're like, yes, it does.
Yeah.
You're like, think about I think about when I was a young girl and I was like 13, and whether or not my outfit looked good.
Yeah.
That mattered. And if someone told you it doesn't matter, how they can convince you that it doesn't matter?
It mattered.
Your reality at that moment is that what I wear to the first day of school matters.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
very much so.
It's so hard. Like I coached high school track a long time ago, and I try to tell these girls some of the stuff that this isn't going to matter when you're my age. And they're just like, whatever, coach. And I just think it's hard until you experience things where you have, like, there's no replacement for the actual true experience.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing that, like, okay, now that that's happened, oh my gosh, it really doesn't matter. Like, life goes on, or that didn't affect me the way that I thought it would. And I really do wish, like, my wish has always been that, things that I ruminated on or spent too much energy, like mental energy and stress on at any point, that I hadn't, because it was time that could have been spent somewhere else. But it's only in hindsight that I realized, like, oh, okay, now Briana, don't do that again,
Totally. Oh my gosh. The years I have spent agonizing over health scares that never came to fruition. I mean, it is so frustrating and even exhausting to think about the hours and days that I wasted and that I put on my family, like just that, that energy. And so I try really hard now when things come up and you got to wait for answers and all that, to just say, like, I'm going to live in this present moment, and I'm not going to obsess over what may or may not happen or be happening, because I have no control over it.
Literally.
It's so hard to do that, though.
It really is. And like, I know there's probably psychology about it, and I'm not a psychologist, but that, like, as much as we want to not think about things, there's something probably self-preserving that makes us do that.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very difficult to just have your brain turn it off or put it. I mean, how do you do that? And I think obviously the more lived experiences we have and validation of, okay, that didn't actually do me any good. That's where we can, to your point, go, okay, that ruminating really didn't help me. So I know that now, so I'm not going to do that, as best as I can.
How do you handle now, going back to what we were talking about with, like, nobody was giving you a chance because you didn't have this time or this title or whatever. How do you deal with not, like, thinking now that you ran that 2:33, not thinking, well, what if somebody would have? Because, like, that's gone. That part of the life is over. So it didn't happen. But, like, you have to wonder. So then how do you not let that bug you?
At first, it definitely, like, there's a lot. I would say it didn't get to my brain of just like the anger towards, like, ugh, why didn't these people give me a chance? Of more just like, why didn't I let myself give myself the chance?
Mm-hmm.
I got very mad at myself of, like, gosh, see, Briana, what you thought you could do, you can do. Why did you let people tell you couldn't do it? And so I definitely spent some time in that realm. But you know what I came to the realization was that I know it sounds super cheesy, but I think the experiences we have and the decisions we make, we have to be okay with those decisions. And when what happens when it happens is when it was supposed to happen. It's just, I was, for whatever reason, like, I was going to be ready to run that time when I was almost 43 years old. Not when I wasn't ready to do that in my 20s and 30s for whatever reason, but whether it was, mentally, physically, like, I was not capable of it at that moment. And I was capable of it when I did it, because that's when I did it, and I think I do this in all aspects of my life, from when I was younger, trying to get into colleges and people who said yes or no to me, to business experiences where I've not been heard in an environment, and not done what I thought I should do, is that ultimately, like, the things that happen when they happen because of all the things around it that allowed it to. And at that moment, I just didn't have that, for whatever reason. And you have to be okay with it. And looking behind is never going to be beneficial. I mean, at first, there was that feeling of just like, what could I have done? Could I have gone to the Olympics? Like, imagine if I'd run 2:33 at 27, like, where would I be now?
Yeah.
Super hard. But I mean, truth be told, like, I wasn't going to be able to do that then, mentally, physically, all those things. And so being actually grateful for the fact that I did do it has to be where my brain goes. And that's where eventually I came to, is like, but guess what? I did do it. I did it when I did it, because that was when I was ready to do it.
Yeah.
And hopefully then other people see that if they didn't achieve something at 25 or 28, when society tells you you're supposed to do certain things, it's okay, because that doesn't mean it's not going to happen in the future. And just to not all of a sudden think that, well, it's not going to happen. Just continue on your path, doing the best you can with what you have at that moment. And when the doors open, they're opening because you are ready to do it. I really, really believe that. And I mean, I think about when I was younger, like, those 40 under 40 lists.
Yes.
I always, like, if I'm not on a 40 under 40 list, then I haven't accomplished anything. And I'm like, I kind of had to chuckle at myself when I did something at the, like, almost 43. I was like, you know what? Screw the 40 under 40 list.
Yeah, screw that.
Like, who cares what age you are? Like, you do the things you do when you do them, right?
Yeah.
And some people do it quickly, and who knows what their story was that got them there. But if you don't, like, we need to know that that's okay too. We have these very, very weird standards. And I think that's also the realization that I made in terms of getting angry at the past, is we have these weird standards of when things should happen and how they should happen. And I don't know why. And I think nowadays I feel for the youth. Social media brings that even more in your face, like right in front and center. And if anything we can do is to try to ignore that there's some sort of rule around when and how things should happen,
Yeah. Where was I going with that thought that you were just saying? Oh, the 40 under 40. Yeah. And with 40 under 40, it's like kind of political too. Like, who do you know? Who's nominated you?
Yes.
It's the who knows who game. And
yeah. Which is so much of life that is super frustrating.
It is so frustrating. It's so lame.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think that that's always a little bit of a life struggle, is when you see someone much younger than you being much more successful. And I say that with quotations, because I'm like, what is success? Like, by society standards, you're like, wow, they've already opened all those doors, and I've got 15 years on them, like, why wasn't I doing that? Well, I don't know. I was doing other things.
Yep.
I don't know why we do that to ourselves. So you've talked about your entrepreneurship quite a bit, and I'd love to hear more about that. Entrepreneurship is, to me, so exciting and so scary, because you're like all on your own. I grew up with a dad who, he was a roofer, and he owned his own roofing business.
Interesting.
And so, like, very, very much like started his business when we were little kids, and like kind of went out on a limb and went on his own, and very much figured it out as he went. Like, he didn't graduate from high school, like, so I have like witnessed that my entire life, how he built his life around entrepreneurship. And actually, it's interesting, myself and both of my sisters, we all work for ourselves. We all run our own businesses, all three of us. Yeah.
That is so fascinating, because it's like you saw it.
Mm-hmm. And I think my husband's like, you just could never work for somebody else because you're so stubborn.
Working for yourself is pretty cool.
Yeah. Like, don't tell me what my schedule is. Are you kidding me?
Right.
Don't tell me where I have to be.
Right.
So anyway, all that to say, I'm fascinated by entrepreneurship. So talk about your road to it and what you do.
Oh, thank you, Lindsay. I love being able to talk about that because, people don't, particularly, since I've been post running the time that I ran, like the podcast I'm on, a lot of times people are just talking about the running and the
Yeah.
time and stuff. And there's all these other aspects to our lives that we don't get to share. And to me, like running is such a parallel to life in the cheesiest of ways, but it really is. And entrepreneurship is probably, I now see why that's a path that I chose. Just from my background of loving to see what I'm capable of and pushing myself in different ways. But yeah, like I went to school thinking I was going to be a doctor. Like, it's like when you're a
Really?
kid, like you're being told like be a doctor or a lawyer. I mean, this is when I was a kid, right? Like you have to have these like professions and
Yeah.
need to do something that people, deem worthy. And so, yeah, I went to like at first I was pre-med. And then in my first anatomy class, we had actual cadavers. And I walked in and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, oh, I can't do this. Like, like maybe I'll go into research. So then I went down like a
Uh-huh.
research path. Like I'm just gonna be a researching like medical person.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, so like that was what my degree was in. And when I graduated, just got like kind of by happenstance into entrepreneurship when a local physician saw what I was doing just on the side with some coaching that I was doing. I was coaching athletes and he was like, "Can you do this for my company?" And I
Hmm.
thought, that's a really interesting question. Could I do that for your company? And then my husband and I started a corporate wellness company. And I never looked
Okay.
back in terms of just trying to build small business. And I'll just like super fast forward to, now I teach entrepreneurship at the university. I'm on the board of directors for Startup Colorado that supports entrepreneurs in rural Colorado. And I'm a part of a startup called Goodie Bag.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and what we do is we basically connect surplus food, so food that restaurants and bakeries and cafes have at the end of the day that they weren't able to sell. We connect those to people so that they can purchase that food and they can purchase it at a discount up to at least 50% off, if not more. So we're basically addressing food waste, food insecurity a bit. Like, I mean, food is just really expensive. So
So expensive.
yeah, like, I mean, and good food is getting thrown away. And so,
Yeah, it's so gross.
yeah, I mean, it's a crazy problem and it's such an easy solution where you just need to connect people to said food. Right.
How
And
do you
so
do that with Goodie Bag?
it's so easy, so we have an app and the restaurants, at the end of the day or whenever during the day they have something. So for example, a pizzeria that does pizza by the slice, like they rotate their pizza every about 4 hours. So
Yeah.
that for them, they're going to post stuff throughout the day. But they just go into the app. They say they have a goodie bag available, which is a mystery bag of items. You don't know what you're going to get. You have an idea. Obviously, if you're ordering from a pizzeria that you're going to get pizza, you can designate, the restaurant can designate if it's vegan or vegetarian, dairy free, gluten free, but it's a mystery. They post it. We notify all of the customers on the app with a push notification that there's a bag available either in their area or from a shop that is their favorite shop. And then they can go in and purchase that bag and then they just go pick it up.
Hmm.
I mean, it's all an app. Like we're just facilitating the transaction between the shop and the person. So yeah, you just think about any sort of app that you're using. You just get a notification that something's available and you can purchase it and the bags sell out. I mean, as you can imagine, the biggest complaint we get is like, oh, I couldn't get one. They sell it so fast. Um,
Is this only in Boulder or are you elsewhere?
we're elsewhere. So right now we're in Boulder, Denver, Fort Collins, Charlotte, North Carolina, and then Phoenix,
Oh,
Arizona. And to your question of the startup world, it is, I've now been in startup world for 2 decades and it never gets easier in terms of trying to build a business. And so like right now we're currently fundraising. I mean, we've done so much with so little. So we have a fully functioning app on iOS and Android. We've actually seen 160% month over month growth and we're looking to launch into new markets. As you can imagine, there's like expenses that go into all of that. And we're, basically out of the small amount of funds that we had. And so now we're fundraising. And for anyone who doesn't know the world of fundraising, like at first you're kind of looking for seed funding, and then hopefully you get to a point where you're at a value that you might get a Series A round from a bigger firm. But right now, from the seed round, you're kind of looking at people who want to like start these small businesses that are just gaining traction. And a couple years ago, the venture capital world, there was just money being thrown left and right to startups, like super easy. Now there's still ton of capital out there. There's a lot of money, but people being a little bit more judicious about giving it. So I am deep in the throes of pitching to all these investors. We have, a pitch deck and a data room with all of our stats, and
wow,
having them look at it and deciding if they want to give us money. And I mean, it's just, yeah, it's stressful, right? Because you have this idea that's doing well, and you know where you need to go to get it to the next level, and you need the capital to get there, and you just don't know when you're going to get it. Anyone in the startup world knows exactly what I'm talking about. And it's so different than the normal corporate world. It's night and day. Like, there's a lot of insecurity. Like, you're working 24/7. Like, I was just listening to a podcast with the Airbnb CEO about his early days, and like how he was literally working like 16 hours a day, like constant. Like, I mean, these stories are all so similar. Like, at first, like, you don't have much, and you need to find your early believers. I mean, it's just like running,
Your
like
early
finding the
believers,
early
yeah.
believer who sees the potential. It's identical to what we were just talking about. Like, we need someone like, no, I'm not Facebook right now. It's not obvious, but the signs are there that we can do something great. Someone needs to see that potential and want to invest in it and be an advocate, bring their resources, their network of people to help you, because it's not just the money you need. You need a network of advisors and connections to people who understand, for us, like who understand marketplaces, because we're a marketplace. We're connecting people to a product. We're in the food space, so people who understand food. I mean, it's the same thing, right? And so I've seen this because I've been in the industry for so long. So many startups fail because they just didn't get those early believers to help them. And then somebody has the same idea later who got the early believer, and boom, right? Like, YouTube's a perfect example. There were other YouTubes before YouTube. They just didn't quite make it, right? And so it's, you see that, like, DoorDash beat out Grubhub. How did they do that? Like, there's like, these stories are fascinating, right? Of just who made it. Not that Grubhub didn't make, but DoorDash is like the clear winner.
Oh, for sure.
Or how Uber and Lyft, like, those stories are fascinating.
Uber wins. Yeah. They're way bigger.
How did they do it? Yeah, they are. They won. Yeah. And it's like, how did they do that? And these stories are fascinating to me, because there's a lot of little intricacies, sometimes who what network you're a part of, but then finding the people who are willing to, like, invest in you, your team, your idea, to be scrappy with you, so.
So before I do live shows, sometimes I listen to an Oprah interview.
Oh my God, I love this. I love
just
Oprah.
Because I'm just like, if who's the queen? It's Oprah, like, of interviews. So I just will listen to her sometimes, even if it's like a really short interview, because I am like, let me just get her, like, vibes. Let me just, like, let me just soak in this presence.
Do you have a funny side story, Lindsay, of Oprah?
Yeah, tell me.
I'm an only child. My mother died when I was really young, 19 months old. She was killed when I was super young. And my dad was not around much. Like, he was always working. So I'd come home from school to an empty house. And the first thing I did when I'd come home, this is going to be, it's like, I'd make a bowl of rice. I don't know why, and put a ton of butter on it. I don't know why, but I'd have buttered rice, and I'd watch Oprah. And, like, she was like my parent. Like, I was like, I'm going to watch Oprah. And because the life lessons, right? Like, I had to watch Oprah. So it was like the same thing. Like, she was my, like, okay, what does Oprah got to say today? Yeah.
I love that. Oh, this episode of Oprah had nothing to do with, like, the podcast I was about. It was before I interviewed Des in Traverse City.
Okay.
But the episode I listened to was with Brian Grazer. The Secret to a Bigger Life is what the episode was called. And I didn't even know who he was. But I guess he wrote a book called A Curious Mind, The Secret to a Bigger Life, which sounds super interesting.
Yeah.
But he made this, like, goal early in his career that he would, like, make a new connection, like, every single day. Like, just meet someone and, like, get to know them and actually, like, talk to them. And sometimes there'd be people that he really wanted to know and meet, and he would work on it for, like, a year. Like, it would take him that long to, like, know that person, but then eventually, would turn into these relationships. And so
wow.
I think we were just kind of talking about like who
Yeah.
with all this stuff. And I'm like, gosh, but that sounds like a full-time job in itself.
It
And like,
does.
and I don't think his motivation was like, so that I can get more ahead. It's so that he could be more curious about the
Right.
world,
That's really cool. Because I mean, truthfully, I mean, everybody has a story and has something that you've not experienced, lived, so just at the base level, like to know a new person as often as you can and learn their
Yeah.
story. I know there's these things out there now, but I always had this idea that someday when I retired, that I would love to just walk around and just be like, hi, would you like to talk to me for like 5 minutes? I'd love to hear your story.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
write about that, like a journey of like 6 months of just asking people their story and just hearing, because you just know everybody has crazy things that have happened to them, or, amazing or sad, or like, just how fascinating to just hear like a little bit of somebody's life, and knowing that every single one is going to be different.
Yeah. It's sort of Humans of New York-ish.
Is it? Okay. I know there must be things like that. Like I was like, I'm sure there's so many times where I'm like, I have this idea and I'm like, oh, someone's already thought of that.
This is the entrepreneur brain, but that is why, like we were just saying with Uber and Lyft, like that's
Right.
why being an entrepreneur is so cool, because like, yes, of course someone's already thought of something
Right.
like that. Are they doing it? Are they doing it well?
Exactly.
How could you do it differently? All those things.
Which is so fun. Like I love the idea of like trying to create a different like view of something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because the truth of it is, we teach this in the class that I teach, most ideas have already been thought of, right? Novel ideas are not around anymore. We're not talking about we're living in the 1700s. But how we do things and the manner with which we attack a problem, definitely there are other ways. I mean, AI is a perfect example, right? Like just bringing that into the fray of how we can do our work more efficiently, right? Is just, it's a different way to go about it. So
I saw somebody posted like, I want AI to do my dishes and laundry, not to create my art for me.
yeah, same.
Like, I don't, but actually, like, there's this, I won't go into detail on the podcast, but there's like a business idea my friend Tracy and I have, and we've been like using AI to like help us write a business plan and things like that. And I'm like, this is too easy. Like,
Right?
they're too helpful almost. It's
know,
great.
you're like, well, and then
But
sometimes it's like not like I listen to so many, I love podcasts. I'm a podcast junkie. And there's one I listen to called Hard Fork, which is all about technology. And they're two like well-known like guys in the tech space that host it. And they talk about how like with AI, I still personally, whether like it's a drawing or writing or whatever, I still want to hear the creativity from a human brain.
yeah, I know.
Right. So it is easy for it to do that, but it's doing it off of an algorithm, and it's never going to replace the creativity of a human brain. There's still something there. And so like,
It takes the fun out of it.
it does. Like, even if AI can do this beautiful painting, I still want a painting that a human did.
Oh, for sure.
I just do. Like, there's more value to me in that. So
yeah, it's a wild ride. Okay, so with the goodie bags, so people have the app and then they get notified when there's okay. Um, do you make money from the restaurants?
we make money from the purchase. So here's what's great about it is there's no cost or commitment for the restaurant to use it. Like, we don't charge them an annual fee or anything like that. We just take,
and they were going to get rid of the food.
They were going to throw it away.
Yeah.
So it's a sunk cost to them. And so we're helping them hopefully recover that sunk cost. And the data that we have, is very strong on this. They usually get a new customer. So the unique new customers that walk in their door is huge. And for small business owners, we focus on small local shops. This is huge. Then also when people come in, they usually purchase something else. Like, if you're going to get bagels, you're probably going to get a tub of cream cheese. Like, you're just gonna. So yeah, what was your initial question? I just kind of went off topic there.
Oh, just how you make money.
Well, how we make money. So we just take a small percentage of the purchase,
The transaction.
Yeah. And then we actually cover the transaction fees. So they have no worries. They just get a
They
certain
literally.
percentage. Yeah. And then we deposit it in their bank, done.
Okay.
So it's very low effort on their point. And then we are hopefully making that connection.
Yeah, that's so great. Because I just like, it's crazy the food waste that happens in these restaurants. I mean, it
I
is like,
know.
it's so sad, really. Like, you know.
And I think restaurants, and we've seen this, it's cool to see, but then also you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they didn't realize this, is the sunk cost in that food
Hmm.
waste. So I'll give you an example of just like a simple cookie shop. So a
Hmm.
cookie shop in Charlotte, North Carolina, like they just, I mean, they try to make as many cookies as they feel like they can sell. You never want to run out because you don't want to turn
Hmm.
away customers. And they have like a, like not a ton, but a decent amount of cookies that are left over. And so then they get on our app, and I kid you not, the first month I wrote this woman, I didn't write her a check, but like her deposit was like almost $3,000 for
Wow.
cookies. And she's a
For a month.
for a month, small business owner.
Talk about covering your rent.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's sunk costs that now that you were throwing in the garbage,
Hmm.
somebody's getting good food, like, I mean, the emails we get from people, like giving them the opportunity to purchase this food in this climate, like you don't have to be somebody who's on food
Sure.
stamps, still really, really need,
It's
good,
so expensive.
totally. And oftentimes food that you wouldn't normally purchase just because it is a little bit more expensive. So having that
Hmm.
opportunity to get the gourmet cookie when instead of getting the cheap cookie,
Hmm.
um, having the opportunity to get like the organic meal that you wouldn't normally purchase, so
Hmm.
it's opening up like all that opportunity. And I think these shops don't realize how much they're just throwing away, that people are more than, and we're a pickup model. So the caveat is you have to go pick it up, but people are
Yeah.
more than willing to pick up food that's 60% off.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's worth it.
So you're wanting to expand to more markets, but you have to wait. You're in that fundraising part still. Okay.
Yeah. It's
And
been
if you
a
get
slog.
venture capital, those people will have an ownership stake
Yeah.
or
So
no?
yes. So how that, I mean, there's a couple different ways that you can have investment. There's now these vehicles called safes, which have kind of a little bit more favorable setup for founders, or there can be priced rounds where you're the favorability to the founders is not quite as good. But yeah, so there's basically these firms, whether it be an angel, a syndicate, which is a group of angels, or an actual established VC firm that has a fund. And those, just to kind of like paint that picture, like when you're going to a fund, like they have people who have put money in to this fund to be invested in small business. So they do have a little bit more of a, they're beholden to these people, kind of like in the stock market, these companies that have gone IPO, they have investors that are like, I want to see a return.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so they get equity in your business,
Okay.
on specific terms, like on an evaluation that you've set, in those terms. And the hope is any founders that you don't get diluted too much. Like if you've ever watched The Social
Right.
Network, that
Yeah.
there's truth to that whole, like how they talk about it. The more investments you get, the more diluted you're going to get. And you're
Right.
hoping at the end of the day, like all your hard work went somewhere and you don't just have 0.5% of your business,
Right.
So yeah,
Totally.
it's a
So,
game.
yeah, for sure. So looking forward now, I know you've struggled with some injuries and whatnot. How are you processing like where you are athletically, business wise, life, all that?
It's a great question. And thanks for asking, Lindsay. Yeah, like I say this, in hopes that it resonates with people, is that you should go after your big goals, but also when you hit certain goals, be wary of the consequences sometimes of hitting these goals. And I
Hmm.
don't want to say consequences in a way that they're bad, just knowing what you're going to do once you hit it. And so for me, when I hit the 2:33, even though it wasn't necessarily a time I had written anywhere, I mean, I did not write that time anywhere, but the Olympic trials had always been something that I'd wanted to do. Is that now there's this sense of like, oh my gosh, I need to validate that.
Hmm.
I definitely have had that. I don't know if everybody does, but I do feel like even in business, you have a business win, and then you're like, now, like, I mean, think like I'm the CEO of Uber. Now what? Like, what do I do next?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was just listening to a podcast with Adam Grant, the organizational
Mm-hmm.
psychologist, with David Duchovny, And he was
Ooh.
talking about how like X-Files was this big thing. And then after that, now what? Right?
Yeah.
Like he really struggled because how do you ever top X-Files? And he's like, the reality is that you don't.
Mm.
For him, like he's like, I don't, but that doesn't mean I can't have successes that are just as meaningful.
Oh, that's good.
And so, yeah, for me, like, unfortunately, injury has always been a thing for me. And I've been pretty injured ever since my 233, basically on and off. And I still do believe that I can run sub 230. I know I can do that. I see women who are older than me who have done that. I was just telling a friend this, that with the injuries I've had, there's a part of me that's like, oh, am I just not going to do it? And my mindset has gone back to like, yeah, it's too late now. Like, am I
Mm.
not going to be able to do it? And I don't want myself to do that. And so
Hmm.
when I say be wary of the consequences of just like, be willing to understand that you achieved something, and the way that you achieved it, you need to remember that, and that you don't have to do something special to the next thing. It doesn't have to be
Mm.
any different, because I definitely live in a world, I think all of us probably see this on social media, where you see stuff and you're like, wait, do I need to do that now if I want to hit the next thing? And I see these people running 120, 130 mile weeks. Do I need to do that? I see them post workouts and I'm like, oh my God, like, do I need to do that to get to the next level? And you kind of spiral down when, how did I get the 233? Nothing spectacular. And can I do that again? Of course I can, but I need to not put that pressure and that expectation. And so I'm working through that right now currently, of just, I need to be healthy. I need to stack together just normal weeks of training. Do I need to do something crazy? Like, I mean, I see things when people are injured and they're biking 5 hours a day and I'm like, oh my God, like this is insane. Do I
Yeah.
need to do that? Like,
Yeah.
and I think I need to see more people say, no, you don't.
Yeah.
Right. I need the real people to go, no, you do not need to bike 5 hours a day. Number one, I don't have time for that, but
Yeah.
I think more of us need to hear stories that you don't need to do that. Because I certainly didn't do all those crazy things to run 233. I just consistently ran. And I am working through trying to remind myself that. And it's the same thing with small business, right? It's like you hit little wins and then you think, well, now what do I need to do special? And sometimes it's not. It's just, making sure that you're being true to all the things that in life that you need to do to be successful. For me, being injury free means like also like removing stress from my life, spending time with my family, like other things that allow me to do those big goals because I'm happy and healthy. Right. So
Yeah. And if biking 5 hours a day doesn't bring you joy,
no, I definitely would not.
yeah, like, why are we doing this?
I used to do Ironmans and
Oh my gosh.
I know. And I honestly, like, I'm glad that I did it, because there's something very fulfilling about achieving something that you think doesn't look possible. Like I was just like, I don't know if I can do this. But honestly, whenever I do those long rides on the weekend, there would get to a point where I was like, what else could I be doing with my time? Like, I don't like exercising that much. I enjoy exercising, not to that extent. I mean, I have friends who do these 100 milers and 2 milers. I'm like, yeah, that's too much time. Like, so yeah, I hear you. I don't love it enough.
What was your best? I think we talked about this, but what was your fastest Ironman time?
I did a 9:22,
Okay.
which is
That's fast.
it's a decent time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was,
Do you
I
remember
mean,
your splits, like your swim, bike, run?
yeah, I think my swim was a little under an hour. Oh gosh. See, I don't place as much emphasis on it's funny because I live in this world of people who like obsess over numbers, right? You see like in
Yeah.
the kind of high end world, and I just don't. I want to say my bike then was like a 5:15 or something, and then I ran like a 3:15 or something like that. Yeah, something around there. Like they were all really good splits. Like like
Yeah.
to hit that
Even.
time, it had to be everything was on,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah. The bike, it's so hard because it's such a huge percentage of it. And if that's not what you love,
yeah, and I got
that's
myself
what you have to spend the most time doing.
You do. Like you have to. There's no faking it in an Ironman. Like it's the same thing with marathon, half marathon, half Ironman, full Ironman. Like you doing a half Ironman, you don't need to put in like, I know some people do, but you don't need to put in crazy training to have a decent day. Same with the half, but the full is a different beast.
It's different.
Full Ironman, it's just, you have to do those long rides or else you're there's just no way. Like you have to
Yeah.
sit in the saddle for hours on end so your body can actually, and then you have to run a marathon off the bike. So, I mean, you have to be able to do that. And so, yeah, it takes a lot of effort and time.
My husband did one full Ironman. I think he did 1052, which
It's great.
yeah, it was like such a solid day for him.
Yeah.
And I was like, and you know, that was right after we had our first baby.
Oh my gosh.
And like it, you know, and then had 3 more over the next 6 years. And so like it was really good timing actually, because when you have one infant,
right,
it's really not that time consuming.
But when you have 4,
yeah. And like toddlers running around. So it was actually perfect timing. And I was like, you know, this is a really great place to hang this up. You completed it and you completed it well. You had no blow ups. I mean, I think if he could look back, he'd say, I wish I would have been a little stronger on the bike.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like, so anyway, we were talking about Ironmans yesterday. My second oldest was asking me all these questions and he was like, cool. I want to do that. And I said, you know what, buddy? I kind of want to have that on my like check off the bucket list too, because I've done a half, not a full.
Okay.
And I said, so if you ever commit to one, I'll commit to it with you.
Oh my God, I love that.
So I'm
Lindsay.
like, that gives me at least 9 years because he's only 9. So I'm like, you can't do it before he's 18.
Say, what's the minimum age?
Yeah, probably 18. I will do it though. I think if any of my kids wants to commit to it, I think I'd commit to training for it, regardless of my age, as long as I'm like healthy enough.
Yeah.
You know?
Oh my gosh, Lindsay, if you do, I would love to like, be
Wouldn't that be fun?
Cheering and just
yes.
Like, if you have any questions, like I can tell you all the things I did wrong.
I know your husband did it 9
too,
years.
But yeah.
Well, he does. Yeah, I mean, yeah, he did, and he didn't have a coach or anything. He did it really well.
Impressive.
It's just so intense, that training. I mean, he would spend hours on our front porch on that bike trainer.
Oh, it's just, I mean, yeah, it's unreal what you have to do because when you really think about it, you're swimming. People don't understand. Like when people hear you do an Ironman, lots of times they don't understand what it is. And they're like, oh yeah, my friend does that. I'm like, do they? And they're like, yeah, they did one last weekend. Then the weekend after, I'm like, oh, those are probably
a sprint triathlon.
Sprint triathlons, not an Ironman. Yeah, because when you actually tell people that you swim 2.4 miles, which is no joke, and then you bike 112 and then you run a marathon, like
it's crazy.
It's stupid crazy. Like I'll tell you a quick story. Like I didn't even know Ironman existed. And then it came to Madison when I was in college still.
Okay.
So the very first year was in Madison and they needed volunteers. And so they asked the university, obviously all the athletic department, you know, all the sports. And so the track team, we volunteered at one of the aid stations. And this is how little, like, I just didn't know what was happening. So we were on the first aid station of the run and the lead guy comes off and he immediately goes into the bathroom. And I was like, what is he doing? He's racing. Why would he go to the bathroom? Like, this is insane. Like, isn't he, like, it didn't dawn on me that, you know, he just biked 112. He probably has to pee. Like, maybe, like, I don't know. It's been a long day. And like, I didn't understand what was happening. And it wasn't until like much later that I was like, wow, those people, and you saw all shapes and sizes. And like, it's just such a crazy, you know, like all those people were out there all day doing something so insane.
All day. Madison is the one that my husband did. Did you do Madison?
I never did it. I've cheered it a million times.
Yeah. That's a great one for spectators.
Fantastic.
I saw him probably like 7 times on the course.
It's one of the best.
Just the run course and just the run course alone.
Yeah. It's not an easy one. Like it's very difficult. So that time that he did actually is super impressive for that course.
Yeah.
It is hard. But it is definitely a great, like, if you want to have the feel goods the whole time. The other one, if you wanted to, like, really splurge for your son or whomever decides to do it.
In 9 years.
In 9 years, European Ironmans are the best.
Oh, really? Why?
They close the courses. It's a different atmosphere. All of the bike courses are 100% closed. And, I mean, the communities go insane. They are so supportive of the endurance world. And then, I mean, the scenery is just unreal. So yeah, I've done a couple European ones and I hands down the best experiences I've ever had in terms of triathlon.
So if you're going to do it one time ever, go big is what you're saying.
I would go to Europe. Yeah. If you really want Roth, which is not an Ironman brand, it's Challenge. That one, I've never done it, but it's supposed to be like, just like like imagine Boston, but in a
Uh-huh.
triathlon, like
Uh-huh.
people cheering
That's the
everywhere.
one.
Like the town goes nuts. They have a festival afterwards. Like, yeah,
How many have you done? How many full Ironmans have you done?
I've done 7. Yeah.
Okay, that's a
Including
lot.
Kona. Yeah. And then, yeah, there's already more than I want to
Yeah.
do.
So is the 922 what qualified you for Kona?
It was one that qualified. I qualified for Kona three times. Every time I did an Ironman. But that one did qualify me.
Every time I did an Ironman, I qualified for Kona.
Luckily.
Yeah. What okay, well we'll ask one more question about that then before we do end the podcast. Tell us what's so special about Kona. I mean, I know it's really hard to get into, like really hard to qualify for, but like the race itself.
It's interesting. This will probably not be the answer you thought. For me, so Kona is definitely not a place that I would choose to race. Like I'm a bigger athlete. I'm 5'9". I don't dissipate heat well. Kona is incredibly hot, humid air. Like you bike through a lava field. There's nothing to look at. I mean, it's like Mordor out there. It's super windy. I am deathly afraid of the wind when I bike. So that was like, so what's special probably about Kona, at least for me, was it is probably, if I were to choose a place to race, the last place I'd choose. So the mental battle out there for me. And I know for lots of other people, it's about like competing at Kona, like the best of the best, and which is absolutely, I mean, it's the best athletes are there. But for me, like to get through that race is like a test of my fortitude, because it is all the things that I hate. Like I hate racing in the heat because I'm terrible in it. The wind scares the crap out of me. I mean, my first Kona, like I literally got blown halfway across the road, and I literally about quit because I
That's
was like in
terrifying.
tears and terrified. Yeah. And I just
Wow.
yeah. And I'm like, it's funny. I mean, there are people in their 70s who have done that race, and I'm like, here I am, like crying on the side of the road. I'm like, why can't I do this? You know? But it's
Uh-huh.
a scary place for me to race. So getting through that is a huge thing. But I think for a lot of people, Kona, it's just the art of having to have gotten there, like how hard it is to qualify. And then it is truly one of the hardest places to race. They picked a doozy. And I think that makes it, obviously very special. And then the history of that place. And so honestly, the sad part, which I'm sure you've seen, is that they've now split that it's not in Kona every year for both genders. Like one year it's the men, the next year it's the women, and then they alternate the other gender somewhere else for the world championships. So I think it's lost a little bit of that difficulty because it opened. Yeah. So unfortunately, but it is, I mean, honestly, I will say the first time I did it, I can't describe what it felt like to get through all of that for myself. Like was not my fastest day, but to get through the heat and the wind and the fears and come down Ali'i Drive and see all the people and all the flags of all the countries. I felt like I was kind of at the Olympics for just a minute, and you're running down there and you're like, oh my God, I made it. I made it to this line, and so that is I think any of those experiences are super special. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah.
I imagine all of that experience, like when you finally went to race the marathon and running that 2:33, like that 2 hours and 33 minutes is a relatively short amount of time to work really hard.
It is.
And then at a much smaller scale, I remember after my husband's Ironman, like 2 months later, he went and raced a half marathon and ran a massive PR. I think he ran 118, like flat,
Wow.
so fast. And I think, and it's weird because he didn't have like a ton of speed work in him, but I think that just like wrapping his head around just like running really fast for 13 miles, like that's essentially such a short amount of time.
Truly.
I think he was able to. So I wonder, I mean, there's no doubt that all that Ironman experience played heavily into you being able to run that 2:33.
I no doubt. Like I think all of that endurance training, if there's anything I've learned is, I think we sometimes get a little too conventional about how we think certain things should be done. And like that for sure helped me do the marathoning that I did, the times and just having the durability. there's no doubt in my mind. Now, do I want to train for Ironmans to run a 2:33? No.
No. Get
But
me
the
off that
years of
bike.
it, yeah. Oh my gosh. I haven't ridden a bike. It's so funny because all friends be like, oh, you want to go for it? I'm like, oh, it's a little dusty. I have not ridden it in years.
You're like 5 miles easy on the
Yeah. Like,
Greenway.
can I do it on an e-bike?
Yeah.
So
Oh
yeah,
my
but
gosh.
yeah, for sure. I think there's something, I mean, I know that athletes are showing, we have some examples now that, the cross training and other forms of exercise can actually be quite beneficial. And I think we should embrace the different ways that you can actually achieve these goals for sure.
I love that. I know I feel like the only way I could ever do it like marathon train really well again is if I really embraced that cross training
Yep.
and worked my butt off in these other ways because of injuries.
Yes, I know.
That, I mean there's a special person that doesn't get injured running 70 plus miles a week.
I know. I agree. And like, I've learned that now, even because for a bit, I was just running and I just keep getting injured. And I'm like, I need to go back to just putting in some cross training into my training, which is what I'm doing now, so that hopefully I don't get injured as much, because it's just really hard on your body. And if you're not a full-time professional athlete, and I think that's what people don't realize, like, you see these people who are doing what they're doing and they get to have massages and
all
take naps and all the things. They have the chambers and the things that we just don't have, like
dry needling, cupping, like
yes.
Not just like once a month, like all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Like, my massages are treats. They're not really, they're not every day, like, so yeah, I think we have to recognize that, what do we have available to make sure that we're healthy? And that, I think, is definitely one of them.
Okay, last thing, I forgot, we haven't mentioned Oiselle at all, and I'd love to just talk about your partnership with them.
Yeah. I know I mentioned this at the talk that we did in Boston, but I have been a fan of Oiselle literally since day one. And I think what's so special about this happening now, for me, the sponsorship that I got, which I'll talk about really quickly, in my 40s, was just this validation of the support kind of system, right? It's like, I recognized when they were really a young company just how special, and I just wanted to support that brand. And it was just so cool to see that, like, yes, that brand is what it's always been, right? And so Oiselle, had this Underbird program leading into the trials, and they basically were like, we want to represent these underrepresented people, these untold stories. And I mean, it's funny because a friend of mine, like, shared it to me, and I'm like, yeah, I sound like, this is me, like, totally in a nutshell. Like, I've been trying for decades to try to get anybody to pay attention. And the crux of it all, this is what's so beautiful about it, is I applied, and as I said, I hit the time 3 weeks too early. So I still needed to hit the time. And I applied, and I was like, listen, like, I don't even technically have the time yet, but I just am hoping that you will see the potential. And the fact that they did, I get this letter from Justine, and you normally, like, you remember when you applied to colleges or anything, they're like, we got all these wonderful applications, you're awesome, but no.
Yeah.
Basically, right? Like, it's that, like, dear, like that, oh, like that Dear John kind of thing or whatever, you're just like, And Justine's, who's the athlete, the elite athlete manager, her letter, like, started that way. We got all these wonderful applications. And I was like, oh, I didn't get it, and as I'm reading, and then all of a sudden it's like, and we've selected you. And I'm like, what? And she's like, I know that you haven't hit the time yet, but we really see your potential. Like, literally all the things in my brain that for decades. And so it speaks volumes to their brand. Like, they practice what they preach. And I feel like that is such a undervalued thing, right? So many times we hear people say things, but they don't do what like, there's a disconnect. And Oiselle really does practice what they preach. They want to support the underrepresented. They want to be a community-focused brand for women. I mean, I got a sense of the community, but once I was inserted in as an athlete, oh my gosh, this community is instant family. Like, I was at the gym one day wearing a Oiselle top, and this lady comes up to me, and it didn't even say Oiselle on it. It just had the birds. And she's like, hey, I have that shirt, Oiselle. Like, I'm part of this, like, program. Do you know about this? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, this is really a community. Yeah. And so it's just so special because they supported me in the way that you always hoped that a brand would. And I just wondered, when I went through that experience, like if more brands did that, how many more diamonds in the rough would we see? Like how much more could we do just at such a local community level to like uplift people? That what would be the result of that? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you know what I mean? Like there's something truly special when people who were never heard get heard. And like, what would that mean for a community, for an industry? And I just think big brands like, I mean, maybe Nike will always just sponsor the Tiger Woods, but what if
Mm-hmm.
they didn't? What if they
Yeah.
actually sponsored the Brianas? Like what would happen? Right?
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
just like, as you were saying that, I was thinking like, and just through different decades of people's lives.
Yeah.
Like I understand that brand sponsorship with athletics is like when you're at the top of your game and like there's a at some point your age, like you're
Right.
not going to be able to compete with the world's best, but like what could that look like if sponsorship models looked a little bit different? And like how many, say you're in your 50s, and like how many women in your 50s could, in their 50s, who maybe gave up on athletics or whatever it
Yeah.
is, could be inspired if they saw someone that was like a sponsored athlete at
Yeah.
that age or that decade of life.
I mean, and think about, I mean, this is just my business brain, the consumer landscape,
Right.
right? So in the consumer landscape, this is a fact. The majority of the purchasers are females and they're in a certain
Yep.
age demographic. And they are not the 22-year-old blonde
No.
haired, whatever. Like, right? Like this is fast, setting world record person, right? Like this is not who your purchaser is. And so if we really, really think about it, like what doors do we open as a company, as a brand, when we actually focus on the constituents that we're trying to sell to?
Yep.
Because I don't resonate with I mean, there's certain brands that I may never purchase from just because when I look at it, I'm like, well, that's not me. That's not,
Right.
and so of course sponsor the really fast person, but also who else can you bring to the table? And
Mm-hmm.
I think Oiselle, this like it's in a small. I mean, they're like with me, it's this small way of showing that, and like what else can that do down the road if you expand that ethos to more and more people for your brand? So I don't
Well,
know.
and run specialty stores need to do that too.
Yeah, yeah, 100%.
Because,
Like I get there's certain things that sell, but I think people again don't look deeper to what else sells.
right, right. I know. Who's the model? There's a model, like I guess you would call her plus size, and she was on the cover of Sports Illustrated this month. I just saw it on
Really?
Instagram.
Oh my god, that's so
Yeah.
cool.
The Instagram, I think her Instagram is like Birds Papaya. I can't remember her name,
Okay.
but I love it. And I'm like, that is what the average American woman
Yes.
actually looks like.
Yes. I
Although
mean,
she is like absolutely gorgeous
of
as well.
course.
So
I mean,
we can't all look like that.
I
But
know, I
as
know.
far as her body goes and like the body diversity, like that is what average actually looks like.
Yep. And it's so like, I don't know. It makes you feel better. It's like all the things like we were talking about before of just like something that you can relate to. Like, like I Google things sometimes to see if anyone has the same experience because I want to feel like I'm not abnormal. And so
Mm-hmm.
you see pictures that don't look like anything you can achieve. And it's very difficult. And I really feel for the youth right now. I mean, we had that with our magazines and stuff when I was growing up, like the little fashion
Yeah,
magazines and
like
whatnot.
17.
17, totally.
YM.
Yes. And you definitely saw unrealistic representations,
For
but
sure.
I think you see even like it's like in your hand now, like 24/7, you can scroll through unrealistic expectations.
And these
And
kids are like not having awkward teenage years. I'm like, what is happening?
I know,
Why
I'm
do you
like,
not look awkward? You're 14. You're supposed to look awkward right now.
I mean, thank you. Because like if I were to go back to my high school picture, I'm like, wow, did I never look like that?
It's because they're all wearing like Lululemon,
I
and
know.
I mean, it's just like why it's the wild west
Yes.
there with these kids.
Oh my gosh.
And not to mention, even my sons like talk about having six packs and stuff, and it's because of like what they've seen. They don't even have social media, but it's like it's just out there,
oh
It's
my
just
gosh.
out there. Kids just constantly.
It's like, what are we doing? What are we doing?
I know. All right. What is something professionally or personally you would like to do that you have not done?
So professionally / personally, like I mentioned, I lost my mom when I was really young, to a form of violence against women. And I've always wanted to start something, that addressed that issue. And so sometime very soon, I hope I have the means to just start some sort of nonprofit. One of the things that's really, I don't think people realize is like, actually there's an inundation of like rape kits that aren't like actually tested in banks across the country. And if we did a better job of that, we might actually catch more of these offenders. So something along those lines, like something along the lines of addressing some of these like violence towards women issues that are just not getting the full attention that they should. I really want to do. That is, I've been wanting to do it for so long. And now I'm like, Briana, you got to, like, it means a lot personally. It means a lot like on a professional level that I could maybe create something like that. So that is like something I hope to do. Right now I'm full-time goodie bag, but hopefully soon I can do something more on that personal level.
I thought your mom was killed in a car accident. I didn't know that.
No, yeah,
I'm so
no,
sorry.
yeah, no, it's okay. Yeah, it's definitely something that like I don't talk about a ton just because it's a very like she died in a violent crime,
That's awful.
but so many of those stories happen and people don't hear about them. And there's a lot of, stories where maybe someone wasn't a victim, like to the point where they're not still alive, but they are a victim. And we could do so much more. There's so much to be done in in that space. And I know there's so many issues across the world that need to be addressed, but I sometimes wonder, even with that issue, like if there's even a little bit more of the needle moving in the right direction, how much that would affect other things that are happening, So I would love to
It's
do
so
something there.
scary. Yeah.
It really
I,
is.
and it's such a shame that like as a woman, we have to be like so diligent and like
Yeah.
I hate that I'm scared when I'm like running on the greenway by myself. It's like
100%.
it's
And I
so
think,
infuriating.
yeah, and like what we were just talking about, social media and like X beauty, like I don't think that's helped it, like
Mm.
like what's being plugged out in the world, is made it very difficult. Yeah. I mean, I agree. There's a lot that could be done to just make it a safer space for women in general.
Well, you let us know when you venture into that, and we will
Thank you,
support you.
Lindsay. Thank you. I would love that. Some sort of nonprofit where we can really like make a difference. I really want to do
Yeah,
that.
yeah. What is the best, most recent book you've read?
Ooh, I'm not done yet, but I heard this podcast and then I had to read it. A book called Sociopath. And this
Okay.
lady is a diagnosed sociopath, which you don't realize what you have to read it because sociopath and psychopath are different things. And she is a fully functioning, very smart, like it's fascinating. It is fascinating. I will leave it at that because it's like, I heard her on a podcast and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to read this book. And I mean, she's now like, she writes and she like helps people who are in this same realm as her, but she's
Wow.
diagnosed with it and she's a very fully functioning. Yeah.
And she obviously takes medication.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a really fascinating book. I'm not done yet though.
Okay. What's your favorite business podcast?
Ooh, that's a tough one. So I know this is the cheesy one. I love How I Built This because
Okay, I was wondering about that.
I love that. It's just, you hear these stories and you always hear something in the stories where you're like, wow,
Mm-hmm.
that's how really, that's like what
Yeah.
happened. And so I love that. And then I do love listening to Work Life with Adam Grant because he's an organizational psychologist that deals in the workspace. And there's always nuggets that he either gets from people who run businesses or people who just work in like, organizational psychology that is just fascinating. And yeah, he's brilliant. So
Mm-hmm.
he's a professor at Wharton. So
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
yeah.
What is your last message to leave with our audience?
Ooh. Um, as cheesy as this may sound, um, whatever things that you wanted to do in your life, don't close that door just yet. And even if something is holding you. Like for me, like I opened a door and now it's kind of, I feel like, with my injuries that it's closed a little. I am even encouraging myself to keep that door open, keep the possibilities that the things that you want to achieve are still very much achievable. And if you can ignore the riffraff out there that says you can't, or it says that there's certain ways that it needs to be, do it. Because if you can, there's nothing, we set rules very strictly that shouldn't be there. So I don't see any reason why people can't achieve things that they want to. Just don't close your doors. Don't close them too soon. The podcast I just listened to, there was a quote that he mentioned that was, people always say that nice guys finish last, don't know where the finish line is. And I thought that was such a cool quote, because it's like, we're setting finish lines arbitrarily. And so you say, oh, my finish line was when I was 30. I can't do that anymore. And it's like, well, who said that's your finish line? Right.
Right.
So like, don't set these arbitrary finish lines. Keep the doors open. So
I love that. Bree, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Oh my gosh, I talked to you forever. I love it.
So I know, same.